The cup shattered the moment his name left her mouth. Not because she dropped it, because she didn't know who she was dropping it in front of.
I don't care if the Alpha King himself stood in this corner,
I said, wiping spilled wine from my wrist with the hem of my apron. He could wait 2 more minutes for his tray like every other lord, pretending he isn't starving for attention. The servant beside me went the color of old milk. The man I'd said it to, tall, dressed in plain gray wool like every other staff member circling the ballroom with trays of crystal glasses, didn't blink. He didn't laugh either. He simply tilted his head, slow, like a wolf deciding whether prey was worth the chase.
2
2 minutes, he repeated. His voice was wrong for a servant's uniform. Too low, too still. Like something that had learned to sound smaller than it was. I can wait longer than that. I should have felt nothing. I'd spent 4 years in this house feeling nothing on purpose. Marrowhall trained that out of grief and into discipline. The way you train a wound to stop announcing itself every time it's touched. I was nobody here. A girl pulled from the orphan registry at 14 because I could read ledgers fast and complain slowly. I poured wine. I memorized which lords liked their glasses filled to the rim and which ones wanted restraint. I was furniture with opinions, and the opinions were supposed to stay inside my skull. But something about the way he watched me made my skin remember it was skin. "You're new," I said, because it was easier than asking why my pulse had picked an inconvenient moment to misbehave. "I am," he said. "Recently reassigned around us." The claiming ball spun in its slow gold circle, silk and candlelight and the particular hunger of unmated wolves, pretending they weren't here to be chosen. Somewhere across the hall, the real spectacle waited, a dais, a throne, and the empty seat beside it that every unbonded woman in 3 territories had bled coin and pride to stand near tonight. The Alpha King was expected to walk through that crowd before midnight and choose a mate by sun alone. That was the old law, cruel and absolute, written before anyone alive had been born to question it. I wasn't part of that crowd. I was the help. I'd accepted that the way you accept weather.
You
should go, the gray-eyed servant said quietly, nodded toward the kitchen doors. "Before someone important hears you insulting a king."
I didn't insult him. I insulted the idea of him.
I balanced the tray against my hip, irritation cooling into something steadier. Powerful men don't need me to be careful with their feelings. They have whole kingdoms doing that for them. For one heartbeat, his composure cracked not into anger, into something closer to hunger, the way a man looks at water after a desert. Then it sealed shut again, smooth as a closed door. "What's your name?" he asked. Nobody asked servants their names at a claiming ball, not even other servants, half the time. "Ren," I said, before I could decide whether I should. He said nothing back. He only breathed in, slow, deliberate, the way you'd breathe in wood smoke to remember a house that burned down. His jaw tightened like the breath had cost him something. "Ren," he repeated, and the way my name sat in his mouth made the back of my neck go warm and cold at once. "I'll remember that." Then he walked away into the crowd, gray wool melting into the sea of other gray wool, and I told myself it meant nothing. Servants didn't get remembered. We got reassigned, replaced, forgotten. That was the entire shape of my life since the day my parents' pack burned, and the registry stamped me, unclaimed in red ink, like a wound that never closed correctly. I didn't think about him again until the horn sounded. 3 long notes, ancient and final, the signal that the Alpha King was about to walk the floor and choose his mate by scent. The crowd surged toward the dais like a tide pulling backward before a wave. I stayed near the wall, tray empty, heart doing something traitorous and fast. The doors at the far end of the hall opened, and the man who walked through them, crowned, dressed in black and gold, every wolf in the room dropping into a bow so fast it sounded like wind through wheat, had gray eyes I'd already memorized 2 minutes ago, in a servant's uniform, asking my name like it mattered. The cup I was holding hit the floor a second time. This time, it didn't shatter. It just rolled, slow and obscene, toward the foot of the throne, while 300 wolves turned to see who in this room hadn't bowed. I stood there in 2 plain clothes, wine on my wrist, staring at the king of every pack in the Eastern Territories, the man I had just told to wait his turn, and understood, with the cold clarity of a held breath, that I had spoken to him as if he were nobody. And somehow, that was the first time all night he looked like he was finally being seen. My name had been Ren for as long as I could remember choosing it. Before that, I had a different name, one stitched into a blanket that burned with everything else the night my birth pack was slaughtered. I was 6. I remember fire more clearly than faces. Merrill Hall took me in not out of mercy, but convenience, an extra pair of hands too young to argue, too parentless to be claimed by anyone with an interest in collecting debts. I grew up between the kitchen and the ledger room, learning that survival meant being useful and invisible in exactly the right proportions. Too visible, and someone remembers you exist enough to resent you. Too useless, and someone remembers you exist enough to discard you. I had perfected the proportion. Or so I thought, until 2 gray eyes undid 4 years of careful arithmetic in under 3 minutes. The whispers started before I even rose from my badly executed bow. That's the girl who spilled wine on him. No, she spoke to him first. I heard it. She doesn't even have a scent mark. Look at her wrist. She's unclaimed. That last one landed like a slap, because it was true, and because everyone in this hall had been raised to understand what it meant. Wolves marked their bonded, their family, their pack, a faint shimmer beneath the skin, visible only to other wolves, proof of belonging. Mine had never appeared. Not after the fire. Not after Merrill Hall. The registry called me unclaimed, a word so clinical it almost hid the truth. I belonged to no one and nothing. In a world where belonging was the entire currency of worth, the king hadn't moved from the doorway. His counsel flanked him, an older wolf with a scar threading his jaw, a younger one whose eyes kept darting toward me with something between alarm and calculation. The king himself stood very still, the way predators do when they're deciding whether to let the room see what they're thinking. "Apologies, Your Majesty," I said, forcing the words past a throat gone tight. "I didn't recognize. You didn't need to," he said. 3 words. The hall went silent enough that I heard the wax of a candle hiss somewhere behind me. "I was dressed as staff," he continued, gaze steady on mine, ignoring 300 wolves holding their breath in unison. "You treated me as staff. That is not an insult. That is the only honest exchange I've had all evening." The scarred counselor's mouth thinned. "Your Majesty, the sending ceremony will happen," the king said, without looking at him. "When I'm ready." He started walking, not toward the dais. Toward me. Every step closer made the air feel thinner, like the room was being slowly drained of something I needed to breathe. Wolves parted around him the way grass parts around a blade. I had the wild, useless thought that I should run, except running from an alpha king in his own hall was the kind of decision that ended in stories told as warnings. He stopped 2 feet away, close enough that I could smell him now. Cedar and rain and something underneath that, something old and tired, like a wound that had healed wrong and been left to ache rather than be reset. "Why do you have no mark?" he asked, quiet, just for me, though everyone strained to hear. "Because no one's ever claimed me," I said. The truth, plain and ugly, dropped into a ballroom built entirely on the performance of belonging. Something moved behind his eyes, not pity, recognition, the look of a man finding a wound that matched his own. "I've worn this uniform through 6 claiming balls," he said. "I walk the floor disguised every year before the ceremony, because I wanted to know what people said when they thought no one important was listening. 4 years I heard nothing worth remembering." He paused. "Tonight, in under 3 minutes, you told me to wait my turn." A ripple of nervous laughter broke through parts of the crowd, uncertain whether laughing was permitted. "I didn't know who you were," I said again, as if repetition might undo it. "I know," he said. "That's exactly why I'm still standing here." He extended one hand, not a command, not a claim, just an offer, palm up between us. "Walk the floor with me." Not as a servant, not as a subject, as yourself, whoever that turns out to be. Every instinct Merrill Hall had carved into me screamed that this was a trap, that powerful men did not offer hands to unclaimed orphans without wanting something in return. But his hand didn't move, didn't reach for me, didn't close around anything until I gave it permission to. I looked at that open palm for 3 full heartbeats. Then I set down the tray, wiped the wine from my wrist one final time, and placed my hand in his. The hall didn't gasp. It went utterly, devastatingly silent. 300 wolves recalculating everything they thought they understood about scent, status, and the woman who'd just been chosen, not by the rules of the old law, by a king who'd spent 6 years disguised, hoping someone would finally see him instead of the crown. "My name," he said, voice low enough that it lived only in the small space between us, "is Chaol." "I know," I said. "I've heard the histories." "Not the histories," he said. "Just that, from you. They put me in a room with a view of the Eastern Gardens, which would have been kind if I hadn't understood exactly what the kindness meant. A guest room in the king's private wing wasn't an honor. It was a question mark with silk sheets. I sat at the window until moonlight replaced candlelight, turning the claiming ball's wreckage of gossip over in my mind. Chaol hadn't claimed me. He'd walked the floor with me for exactly the length of one slow circuit of the hall, said almost nothing else, and then handed me off to a steward with instructions that I be given whatever comfort the house affords, a phrase vague enough to mean everything or nothing. I didn't trust either possibility. A knock came near midnight, soft, deliberate, the kind that asked permission rather than announced authority. Chaol stood in the doorway, crown absent, collar undone, looking less like a king and more like a man who'd been carrying something heavy for so long his shoulders had forgotten how to sit any other way. "You're not sleeping," he said, not a question. "Neither are you." He almost smiled. It changed his whole face, briefly, before the weight returned. "May I come in?" I considered telling him no just to see what he'd do with it. Some old, stubborn part of me needed to know if his patience in the ballroom had been performance or character. "You may," I said, "if you tell me why a king disguises himself at his own ball for 6 years running." He stepped inside, leaving the door open, a small, deliberate choice I noted and filed away. He didn't sit. He stood near the window, looking out at the same dark garden I'd been staring into. "Because the law says I must choose a mate by scent," he said. "And I've never been able to scent anyone in that hall. Not once, not in 6 years." The admission landed strange, heavier than I expected. "That's not possible. Wolves always. I know what wolves always do," he said, something raw cutting under the words. "I am not entirely what I appear to be, Ren. My mother was wolf. My father was not wolf at all. Older than wolf, older than the packs, a bloodline the old laws were never written to account for. I said nothing because what I am wasn't built to recognize what they are." The room went very quiet. "Then why disguise yourself?" I asked carefully. "If you already knew you couldn't find anyone that way." "Because pretending to search felt better than admitting I might never find anything at all." He turned from the window. 6 years of standing in that hall as a servant, listening to women perform devotion to a crown, hoping their performance would be enough to overcome a scent bond that never existed. I learned to expect nothing honest in that room. Until tonight. Until tonight. His gray eyes found mine, steady, unflinching. "You spoke to me like I was inconvenient, like I was ordinary. I haven't been spoken to like that since before I was crowned." I felt something crack open in my chest, careful and slow, like ice giving way beneath a foot, testing whether the lake would hold. "I'm unclaimed," I said, because it felt important he hear it from me and not the registry's red ink. No pack. No scent mark, no family line worth mentioning. "If you're looking for someone the old laws would approve of, I'm not looking for the old law's approval," he said. I stopped seeking the day I realized they had no idea what to do with me either. He crossed the room slowly, the same unhurried patience from the ballroom, and stopped close enough that I had to tilt my head to hold his gaze. "I'm not asking you to be claimed tonight," he said. "I'm asking if I can know your name without a crown standing between us. I already know it. I want to earn knowing it." My pulse did something complicated and loud. "Ren?" I said again, softer this time, and offering instead of a defense. "Ren," he repeated, and this time when he said it, something low and golden moved beneath my skin. Not a mark, not yet, but the ghost of one, like a door learning the shape of its key before it's ever turned. We both felt it. Neither of us said its name out loud. Not yet. The bond shimmer didn't appear all at once. It came in pieces over the following week, like something shy of its own existence, a faint warmth along my wrist when Cale was near, a low hum beneath my skin when he spoke my name, a pull in my chest whenever he left a room, as though some part of me had started keeping count of his absence. I told no one, partly because I didn't trust what it meant, partly because the scarred counselor, Lord Edric, I'd since learned, the king's oldest advisor and least convinced ally, watched me the way men watch fires they didn't light and don't trust to behave. You understand, Edric said, finding me alone in the library on the 7th morning, that an unclaimed woman cannot be queen. The old laws are explicit. Bloodline, pack lineage, scent bond, properly witnessed. You have none of these. I'm aware, I said, not looking up from the ledger I'd been pretending to read. Old habits, useful hands stayed safe hands. And yet His Majesty has not scented anyone in 6 years. Edric continued, voice carefully neutral in the way that meant the opposite of neutral, and now spends his evenings in the company of a servant girl with no mark and no name worth recording. Do you understand what that looks like to a council trying to hold a kingdom together? It looks like a king who finally found someone honest, I said. I imagine that's frightening. If you've spent 6 years managing a king who had nothing but performance to offer instead, Edric's jaw tightened, the scar along it whitening. There is a reason the old laws exist, girl. Bloodlines unaccounted for, like the king's fathers, to stabilize packs. Wars have been fought over less than what you represent simply by existing in this house. I'm not trying to destabilize anything. You don't have to try, he said, quieter now, almost gentle, which made it worse. You only have to exist near him and the council will see a king choosing chaos over continuity. I've watched 2 kings die from choices smaller than this one. He left without waiting for a response, which told me he hadn't come to argue. He'd come to warn me the way you warn something you've already decided is dangerous, whether or not it knows it yet. That evening, Cale found me in the garden, moonlight pooling silver across the dead roses someone had never bothered to clear from an old trellis. Remnants of a garden some previous queen had once tended and then, apparently, abandoned or been removed from. I hadn't asked which. Edric spoke to you, he said. It wasn't a question. He's not wrong to be afraid, I said. I don't know what I am to the old laws. I don't know what you are fully either. That should frighten both of us. It does, Cale admitted, surprising me with the honesty of it. I've spent my whole reign half convinced I was a mistake the old laws hadn't accounted for yet. Every year without a scent bond felt like confirmation. And now? He reached for my wrist, not pulling, just resting 2 fingers against the place where warmth had started gathering like sunlight under skin. Now I think the old laws were never wide enough to hold what we are. Both of us. That's not a flaw, Ren. That's evidence they were incomplete. The shimmer beneath my skin pulsed warm under his touch, bright enough that I gasped before I could stop myself. What is that? I breathed. I don't know, Cale said, voice gone rough. I've never felt it before. Not with anyone. His eyes lifted to mine, equal parts wonder and warning. Edric is right to be afraid. Whatever this is, it isn't written in any law either of us has read. Then we write a new one, I said, surprising myself with how steady it came out. Cale's mouth curved, slow and real. That, he said, is exactly the kind of inconvenient thing I fell for in the first place. Behind us, unnoticed, a curtain in the east wing shifted closed. Someone who had been watching long enough to see exactly what they needed to see. The summons came at dawn, formal and cold, sealed with wax I didn't recognize. A full council hearing, mandatory attendance. My name spelled correctly for what might have been the first time since the registry stamped it. Edric stood at the head of the chamber when I arrived, flanked by elders I'd never seen. Their faces arranged in the particular solemnity of people who had already decided the outcome and were merely performing the process. Ren of no pack, Edric said, and something in how he said no pack made the words sound like a verdict already delivered. You stand accused of falsifying registry documentation. The floor seemed to tilt. I falsified nothing. The registry lists you as unclaimed. Parents deceased in a pack fire 14 years past. Edric produced a scroll, unrolled it with theatrical slowness. We located the surviving registry of that fire. The pack was not destroyed by accident, as Marrowhall's intake records claimed. It was destroyed by royal decree. Your father's bloodline was found practicing forbidden blood magic, a crime punishable by total pack dissolution under the old laws of King's Own. Grandfather signed into effect. The room swam. I don't know anything about your father's bloodline, Edric continued, relentless. The very magic the old laws are written to suppress is the same unaccounted lineage running through His Majesty's father's blood. The same lineage that explains why neither of you sense like a proper wolf. You are not an accident that found him. Ren, you are the last surviving thread of the exact bloodline the Crown spent 2 decades trying to erase. Kale, seated at the dais, went rigid. Edric, enough. It is not enough, Your Majesty, because the Council has finally understood what's been happening in this house. Edric's eyes didn't leave mine. Either this girl is an extraordinary coincidence, or someone arranged for the last unclaimed bloodline of Forbidden's magic to walk directly into the arms of the one king whose blood already carries it. Bound together, that bloodline doesn't weaken. It doubles. It becomes exactly the threat the old laws were written to prevent. Who would arrange such a thing? Kale demanded, rising. Edric's gaze finally left mine, settling somewhere far colder. I don't yet know, but I intend to find out before this council allows a coronation built on a bloodline twice as dangerous as the one we already feared. The hall dissolved into noise. Elders arguing, Kale's voice cutting through, trying to silence the chamber. Edric standing immovable at its center, like he'd been the one holding the floor steady all along. I stood in the middle of it, 14 years of carefully constructed invisibility collapsing into a single unbearable truth. I hadn't survived a tragedy. I'd survived an execution. And somehow, impossibly, walked straight back into the house that ordered it. I left before dawn, while the castle still slept off the council's noise, taking nothing but the clothes on my back and the only certainty I had left. That staying meant becoming the war Edric had already named me. I made it as far as the eastern gate before Kale's voice stopped me, raw and unguarded in a way I never heard from him. Running, he said, is the one thing I never expected from you. I'm not running from you, I said, not turning. I'm running from becoming the reason your crown burns. Then you've already decided what I am, he said, closing the distance without asking what I want. I turned then, anger and grief tangled too tightly to separate. What you want doesn't matter if an entire council believes my blood is a weapon waiting to go off. What you want didn't save my parents 14 years ago. No, he agreed, quiet, devastating. It didn't. I was a child when that decree was signed, Ren. I didn't write that law. But I have spent 6 years as a king who sensed nothing, loved by no law, useful to a council that tolerates me only because I haven't yet given them a reason to replace me. His jaw tightened. You are the first reason I've ever had to actually fight for something. Instead of merely existing inside expectations, Edric will turn the whole council against you. Let him. Kale's hand found mine, steady despite everything unraveling around us. I've spent my whole reign disguised as something safer than what I am, just like that ballroom every year. I'm done being smaller to make old laws comfortable. He lifted my wrist between us, where the shimmer had grown brighter through the week, no longer faint, undeniable now, a soft gold light visible even in the gray pre-dawn. This isn't a weapon, he said. It's a bond. The oldest kind, the kind the old laws were terrified of precisely because it can't be controlled, predicted, or weaponized by a council desperate to keep things small and manageable. It chose us both. Not because of bloodlines, because of who we actually are underneath them. And if the council moves against us anyway, then they'll have to move against a king and the woman the bond itself confirmed as his match, in front of every pack lord who still believes in the old laws enough to recognize what a true bond shimmer means. His eyes held mine, fierce and certain. I won't hide you. I won't disguise this. Not anymore. I felt 14 years of careful invisibility finally, fully crack. If we do this, I said, we do it in front of all of them. Not in secret. Not disguised. Especially not disguised, Kale said, something fierce and relieved moving through his voice. I'm finished being a servant in my own house. The council chamber had never held this many witnesses. Before pack lords summoned from 3 territories, drawn by rumors that the Alpha King intended to claim an unclaimed woman accused of carrying Forbidden's blood magic, in open defiance of the law his own grandfather had signed. Edric stood at the chamber center, scroll in hand, prepared for war. Chaol stood beside me, crown restored, collar fastened, every inch the king he'd spent 6 years disguising himself from being. Before this council passes judgment, Chaol said, voice carrying without need for volume, I ask that the bond be witnessed properly, not by testimony, not by scrolls written decades before either of us was born, by the only proof the old laws ever claimed to honor, the bond shimmer itself. He lifted my wrist into the light, gold spread beneath my skin, vivid and undeniable, climbing past my wrist toward my elbow as if responding to the very ear of the chamber, as if it had been waiting its whole existence for witnesses. The reaction rippled through the hall in a wave of indrawn breath. That is not possible, Edric said, but his voice had lost its certainty. Forbidden's bloodlines do not produce true bond shimmer. They produce instability, corruption. That is the entire foundation of the law you're asking us to ignore. Then your law was built on a lie, Chaol said, because I have felt nothing unstable since the night she spilled wine on my disguise and told me to wait my turn. A murmur of laughter moved through some of the younger lords, quickly silenced by Edric's glare. My father's bloodline was condemned without ever being tested honestly. Ren's family was destroyed from magic the old laws assumed was inherently corrupt, without proof, without trial, without mercy. I am living proof that assumption was wrong. She is too. Sentiment does not rewrite law, Edric snapped. No, I said, and the chamber turned, startled that the unclaimed girl had a voice loud enough to fill it. But truth does. I stepped forward, wrists still glowing, 14 years of swallowed grief finally finding a room large enough to hold it. I was 6 when your law burned my family for a crime no one proved, I said. I spent 14 years believing I was nothing, unclaimed, unscented, unworthy of a name worth recording. I learned to be invisible because invisibility was survivable. My voice didn't shake. I am done being survivable. I would rather be seen and destroyed than safe and erased. I turned to Edric directly. You called this bond a weapon. It is not a weapon. It is an answer to a question your law was too afraid to ask honestly, whether the bloodlines you condemned were ever truly dangerous, or just inconvenient to a council that preferred simple villains to complicated truths. The chamber held its breath. It was an older lord, gray-bearded, who finally broke the silence, one of the Eastern packs, who'd watched in stony silence through the entire proceeding. The bond does not lie, he said slowly. I have seen 3 true bond shimmers in my lifetime. None as bright as that. If the old laws cannot account for this, perhaps it is the laws that require revision, not the bond. One by one, lords who had come prepared for execution found themselves witnessing something the old laws had no framework to condemn. Edric's scroll lowered, inch by inch, the certainty bleeding out of his posture as the room's mood shifted irreversibly away from him. This council, Chaol said, voice final, will revise the old laws regarding bloodlines before the next moon. Not because I command it as king. Because the truth standing in this chamber commands it on its own. He turned to me, gray eyes bright with something that looked, finally, like relief instead of restraint. Ren, he said, no longer carefully, no longer testing the shape of the name. Will you be claimed, not by law, not by sen alone, but by choice witnessed by everyone who once called you nothing? I looked at the gold lights still glowing along my wrist, at the chamber full of lords who come to condemn me and stayed to witness something undeniable, at the man who disguised himself for 6 years just to find one honest voice in a room built on performance. Yes, I said, but only because you asked instead of assumed. The shimmer flared bright enough to light the entire chamber gold, and somewhere in that light, 14 years of unclaimed finally, irreversibly became something else. Something chosen. If this story moved something in you, let me know which part hit hardest in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more.